So my name is Dr. Mary Jo Matta. I'm currently a senior program manager on the Google.org team at Google. I technically sit in our LA office, but I travel all over the world and the country to work on computer science education and artificial intelligence education. And my background is largely at the intersection of education, technology, and social impact. So I started out in my time as an educator, mostly related to STEM, science, math, technology, engineering. I also served on the MIT Media Lab team at Scratch, which is a free language that students get to learn about how to create code through what we call block-based coding. Since then, I have done a number of roles related to that intersection I mentioned. And then most recently, I received my doctorate simultaneously from the UCLA School of Education, targeting tech education for young students of color. At Google, I work on a couple of different programs. The one most recently I've focused on is a program called Code Next, which is a free after-school computer science program. But I've also worked as a diversity business partner. I've worked on some continuing adult education programming, and now sort of play a couple of different roles that sort of intersect project management, program management, a little bit of computer science, and then also human resources. So very excited to share a little bit more about my knowledge and give some insights as to what the current situation is for artificial intelligence in the workplace.
First question is about specific recent success case studies using generative AI at Google, I think Gemini.
Sure. Okay, so, and I'll speak not just to Gemini, but I think also the use of AI products at Google in general. So from a kind of overarching corporate level, more recently, I think the most successful implementation of this so far has been the improvement of our search tool. Google search is really what Google is best known for. And specifically, Google is leveraging large language models to enhance the search experience. I bring this up because anyone who listens to this will be able to see the impact of that. Because when you now Google things and you go on the search tab, at the top of whatever you search, like let's say you search for, the best chicken recipe, at the top, there's that summation of all of the search results below, and it's presented in a very conversational and comprehensive way. And that is literally on the back end, Gemini taking all of the content from the search results and creating essentially a summation for the user. So making the query taking something complex and making it a lot more simple. That's, I think, the most salient example from that level. In terms of like our business partnerships, there's a couple of good examples of how Google is currently using and collaborating with organizations in relation to generative AI. This is the one that I actually experienced a couple of weeks ago, which I thought was really interesting. So there's a big fast food chain here in the United States called Wendy's, and Google and Wendy's have actually partnered to pilot an AI-powered chatbot that helps people go through the drive-through. So if you don't want to go into the restaurant, you go through the drive-through. And so what is happening then is that those drive-through ordering kiosks are now being powered by chatbots to make it happen faster, your order, and then going up to the front where you do then interact with the person. So it's aiming to improve accuracy, efficiency, customer experience. And when I was going through the Wendy's drive-thru, I remember thinking to myself, like, that is basically Gemini in the background working to improve my day-to-day existence, but I might not even realize it because I'm just like, oh, great, that shaved, 2-3 minutes off of my wait for my food. One other thing I would say that's really interesting that people may not know is that anytime we have any AI product at Google, we are always encouraged to what's called dog food it. So dog fooding is a process at Google where Google employees several months or maybe even like a year before something is released publicly, we get the opportunity to test it. And so I remember years ago when there were emails coming out about Bard, which for those of you that don't remember, Bard was basically the pre-version of Gemini. It was what was Gemini before, and now Gemini is kind of like the next step. But they were sending it out to us. And so I actually think one of the best case studies of how we've been using it is we've been actually providing it to the employees of the company and then saying, hey, go in here, put in prompts, and then see what spits out. And if it's something that's good, great, let us know. And if it's something that's bad, let us know. So those are two, I think, those are a couple of good examples, but there's a lot of other different examples, honestly, out there of like how we've been thinking about partnering with other organizations as well, like different business organizations, whether they're already partners of ours or ones that are looking to, develop their use of Gemini in the space. So I also encourage anybody that's interested in getting involved to contact our business unit because they're always looking for more opportunities for good case studies.
Oh, when this case study is quite interesting for me, because after coming to Canada, I was super surprised to see there is the drive-through ATM.
Yes. Yes,
In
that is
Japan,
real.
there is not such a thing
Yep.
in Japan. So I think American and Canadian people don't like to go out from their car, I think.
And that is honestly very true. I agree with you. And that one, what I like about that case study is it's an example of how such a small thing can happen so easily and affect your life, and yet you might not even realize it. But there's so many other great case studies out there. I mean, I know we have this relationship with eDreams, which is this online travel company where they're using generative AI to like personalize and speed up the travel booking experience. There's a number of different ways that that's manifesting, but I think we're going to start to see it more and more in sort of these everyday events where we're interacting with organizations we normally do, and then something with Gemini is going to, on the back end, help either personalize or quicken our experience of that task.
I see. I noticed the UI of the Google search has been changed recently, but I didn't know it was because of the Gemini.
Yes, yes. I don't think a lot of people realize. I think they assumed like, oh, it's just an update, but no, that's actually a very salient example of how Gemini is coming in and basically creating more targeted and personalized information for you based on your search history.
I think there are a lot of more opportunities. Like people are not aware of using generative AI, but they're or actually the backyard there is a generative AI is working.
100%. In fact, I think that that's one of the big recommendations I have for companies who are looking to utilize generative AI is the first thing you need to help your team understand is they're already using it. It's not a matter of, oh, I don't know what this is, or I'm not using it. If you have a functioning phone, you ever Google anything, or you are ever on a laptop regularly during the day, you are using Gen AI in some capacity. You may just not realize it because it's been integrated into the apps or the tools that you've already been using for decades.
That's good, I think, because my parents' generations are not very good at new technology. So not showing them this is generative AI and this is how to use. But rather than that, not telling them this is generative AI and just letting them use.
I just had that conversation with my parents like a week ago. So I'm right there with you.
I see.
Yep.
The next question is about the key points and tips for companies to utilize generative AI. You already mentioned about the specific example of Wendy's, but I would like to ask you about what kind of key points and tips for company to use generative AI from your perspective point.
Well, so actually, I would sort of, there are a couple of different things I would really recommend in terms of tips for them. First of all, I think before you even start to think about where you want to integrate AI into your offerings, it's a good thing to clarify that while generative AI is AI, not all AI is Gen AI. I think there's a bit of a misconception around what generative AI is. It's not everything that's available. In fact, it's really just one part of many different terms that are floating around when it comes to artificial intelligence in practice. You know, you have things like just basic machine learning, which is essentially a system that allows a machine to learn patterns from data, but without somebody going in and programming. Then you have deep learning, which is where you're really going deep with artificial intelligence and using neural networks to basically do tasks like what the human brain would do, right? Then you have things like computer vision. Computer vision is like where computers are able to physically see the external world. My favorite example of this is Waymo. So Waymo is Google's self-driving car technology. You know, so we have little cameras on the sides of the cars that when they're driving through a city, they're able to actually like use AI to detect and predict what is happening around them. And then you have Gen AI. And Gen AI really is it's mostly focused on what's called natural language processing. It's taking processing human language, meaning things that we write or say, for translation. And so I think that that distinction, first off, is important because I think sometimes companies are like, we want to use artificial intelligence. But when they think AI, they're only thinking of generative AI. And then they're, in many cases, only thinking of chatbots, which, by the way, are only one type of generative AI. And we'll talk about that later. So I think getting the distinction down is definitely the first thing that I think companies need to think about. But then also the second point, going back to what I said before, is recognizing that all of your companies are probably already using generative AI in some capacity. You may just not realize it yet, i.e., if you're using tools like Google Search, you are already using Gen AI. It's just not necessarily like super obvious. But the third and probably the most important tip I would say is I think it's important to, before you actually start to say, how are we going to integrate AI into our practice, is to think about what is the specific use case. I've seen a lot of examples, both ones that have been successful and also ones that have been sort of failures, of companies saying, we got to bring AI into what we're doing. But there's no specificity as to what they want to use it for. Like, what is it that you want to achieve? If I said, fill out this sentence, we are going to use Gemini to achieve XYZ. What is the XYZ? Are you going to use the tool to create spreadsheets for, 2025 budgeting? Do you want to use the tool to create maybe marketing flyers for what you're trying to achieve? If you're trying to go more general than that, that's when I think it gets to be a little bit meaty and a little untenable, because saying we want to use AI is too general. You do need to have a very targeted use case for how you want to integrate it, or else what I've seen happen is that employees tend to feel very unwieldy and they don't really know what you're asking for. So just to reiterate, I think the three biggest things are clarifying exactly what you want to use Gen AI for, and understanding that not all AI is Gen AI, then helping folks understand that they are already using it, and then thirdly, making a very clear use case and identifying which tool is best to achieve that use case.
The next question is about trends in generative AI. It's been almost the later part of 2024. But what do you think keywords or key trends are in the use of generative AI next year?
I think we'll continue to see the integration of Gen AI into existing tools, meaning big companies, and not even just big companies, but really companies in general, will be improving or streamlining their offerings. I think about when Gmail started integrating predictive text, where when you start writing emails, the little typing tool automatically offers a phrase that they think you may be interested in, and you just press enter and it just pops up. I think we're going to see more of that. I think we're also going to continue to see more what's called multimodal data generation, meaning when it comes to generative AI, not just text production, more video development, more audio development, more photo imagery development, things that are content, but not necessarily just textual in form. I also think we're going to see more interest in small language models. So there's been a lot of conversation about these big bodies of data and large language models and how tools like ChatGPT and Gemini are being trained on them. But there's been some suggestion that there needs to be done more around small language models because they tend to produce less bias and they also tend to take up less computing power. Google actually has a tool called Gemma. It's sort of like baby Gemini. That is a tool based on small language processing, small language bodies of data. And so I'm curious to see if that's also something that gains steam in 2025. And then actually, I'll say one last thing, because I think this continues to be a conversation. Responsible AI consumption. I think that this isn't necessarily related to the tools themselves, but rather, are there going to be more conversations around policy generation, around when and where can these tools be consumed? How is the data getting collected? How much should the consumer be held responsible for what they may choose to, provide access to versus not provide access to? And frankly, as somebody who teaches young people about computer science education, I'm really thrilled and excited at the idea of young people, especially sort of Generation Z, really coming up and taking on more responsibility for responsible consumption of AI-produced content.
AI policy is exactly what I would like to ask you about. In Europe, the regulations on data protection in relation to the use of the AI, like you talked about, are being really strengthened recently. But on the contrary, in Japan, regulations are not yet so much strict in Japan. So what do you think about this trend?
I mean, I'm a fan of regulation. I think it's important. I take the same approach to, I think, massive policy shift as I do to the same approaches that I have to how we talk about artificial intelligence consumption in the Code Next program that I work on at Google, which is there needs to be more honest and upfront conversations. I do think that there needs to be discussion about what levels of risk are posed by AI, meaning, I'm thinking, for example, about higher risk applications like self-driving car technology, where, we're talking about potentially people's lives, on the street, versus other things like spam filters. But I do think that there's a real need. It's not just a want, it's a need right now to have systems that are related to both the consumers of those pieces of AI technology, as well as the creators of those pieces of AI technology, to develop new laws and regulations addressing AI and or update existing laws to account for, the unique characteristics. I mean, in many ways, we still are very behind when it comes to even the basics of technology, like Wi-Fi access and, connectivity regulation. So there's a lot of space to grow. But I think that if Japanese legislators and consumers and folks in these industries are at all interested and motivated to do this work, I think the EU is a great example of somebody who's started to do the work.
I hope generative AI will solve many Japanese problems, like aging society or some social problems. I hope so.
I think that, I appreciate that. I appreciate you saying that. I also like to remind people that there's no such thing as a silver bullet. The tool is never going to fix our problems for us. It has to be us and figuring out how we can utilize the tools to get to the end. But I always get this question from folks like, do you think that AI is going to replace humans? And the answer is absolutely not. There's no way that's going to happen. It's going to make us though faster, and it's going to make us more efficient. So the question then is, how can we take it to do that, to be more efficient and to produce some of these laws? Because really, AI is not going to do it for us. We're still the ones that are powering it behind the scenes. And so it's ultimately still a human-centered problem.
I really loved your presentation at the last part. You said the AI can improve the efficiency of the teacher's work.
Yes.
The only thing that to give help to your students is just done by human. So I really love that part.
I agree. And there are some interesting texts and books that have come out as of the last couple of years around this as well. I think the one that comes to mind is a book by Jonathan Haidt. He's a researcher, and he wrote a book recently that's called The Anxious Generation. It's about, Generation Z and the impact that social media has had on Generation Z. And his argument is we still very much need to encourage in-person play-based education with students. We still need to get them off the internet and interacting with each other in person. And so I think we'll also start to see more and more text and literature about, yes, these tools have helped us be efficient in some ways, but we are still very much in need of some of the baseline experiences that make us all human.
I totally agree, because I shared some how to use of the ChatGPT or Gemini to 80 years daughter, but when I stay in my office, because I am working at home, she is staying at the living room, and after 10 minutes, I go to check how the proceeding going. Nothing is proceeded. So I think it's really important to be together and tackle on some work,
I agree.
not letting just using AI. So I totally agree.
I agree. Yes. And you know what? I also, whenever people are like, oh, I'm nervous about the future, I'm not nervous, because I have a lot of faith in the younger generations, including your daughter's ages. So I think we're going to be more than fine. Yeah.
Next question is about examples of individual level application of AI utilization. So how do you use generative AI in your private life, not work business life?
So my husband and I recently went on our honeymoon. We decided that we wanted to go to Europe for 3 weeks, right? And I don't know about anybody else, but planning travel stresses me out, because oftentimes it requires a lot of, evaluating different options for hotel accommodations and flights and activities. Then you have to think about the time of year. Then you also have to think about all the different, protocols that you may need to get into a certain place. Do you need a visa? Are there certain other requirements? When COVID was happening, that complicated a lot of travel. And so before we started planning, we actually ended up using generative AI to put together sample itineraries for us, and then also identify different hotels and flight options with some limited, asks, like we would like it on a Saturday, we would like it for these places, at vastly different price points. And it was incredibly helpful. My guess is probably if we had planned the same honeymoon 10 years ago, the planning time probably would have been double what we spent, because a lot of these tools were able to pull data from different sites and summarize it for us in a way that was really easy for us to consume. So that's, I think, a really great example that I've used in my personal life. I have friends who are former college athletes who really love some of the AI tools for fitness tracking out there, mostly to track activity levels, like how many steps they're getting a day. In fact, that's something that I actually think there's a lot more opportunity for companies to think about in terms of encouraging employees to, release themselves from a sedentary lifestyle of just sitting on a computer for 8 hours a day, which can in some ways be problematic. And then this is probably the last thing, I really do love using many of the tools out there for images, creating images, bringing together different images from events that we've taken part in, even from my honeymoon. I have these 2 photos that I really loved of myself and my husband in front of this like beautiful background. But in one of them, his eyes were closed, and in the other one, my eyes were closed. And so what I did was I used an AI photo tool to blend together our individual personas into one photo where both of our eyes were open. And it's a small thing, but I think it's actually the micro examples that are so pertinent in terms of understanding how AI really can be integrated into every part of our lives.
That's great example.
Yeah.
So what did you use the creating the plan for honeymoon?
So for that, I honestly just used Gemini. I went in Gemini. In fact, I can probably go into my history right now. And I said, we would like to go to Italy for 2 weeks. And we'd like to go the first week to Sicily and the second week to the Amalfi Coast. Please provide us with a detailed itinerary that includes sample flights, hotels, and optional activities we could do. And then from there, I kept refining and refining and refining and refining. But what was nice about it, especially, was the hotel curation, because there are so many hotels, and the number of them was overwhelming me. The Amalfi Coast in Italy is a very popular tourist destination, and so many hotels have popped up over the last 20 to 25 years. But what ChatGPT, Gemini, many of these Gen AI tools can provide you with is an opportunity to kind of cut through the noise and give you like a selection, and not necessarily have to have you start from total scratch where you may be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of choices that you have available.
That's great. I hope some new app, just putting into the prompt, then all the travel itinerary gonna be done perfectly.
Yes. And that's one thing I will say is it's a starting place, right? Most of these tools are not going to give you exactly what you need. In fact, I've used a couple of different AI tools out there to generate code bases for myself for writing HTML newsletters. And I know that whatever I pull from it, I'm going to have to go in there and edit a little bit myself, but it gives me a great starting foundation, right? It's like, okay, here, this is, a piece of wood, and now you have to kind of carve out from the piece of wood how you want it to look. But it gives me the piece of wood, so I have something really solid and, strong to start with.
Lastly, could you give us some message to the Japanese business person?
Artificial intelligence is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. That being said, you are already consuming it. So I want you to give yourself a little bit of grace. If you feel like you're behind, I promise you, you're not. In fact, you're probably farther ahead than you think you are. I highly recommend actually looking into tools you're already using and seeing how they may already use generative AI. I love things like Canva, like Grammarly. Obviously, I've talked about Google, but Canva and Grammarly are both very popular tools, and both of them are already integrating AI into their UX. So you probably have already used it if you like those tools. So give yourself a little bit of grace. And then I would also say that if you are somebody who you're in the business world, but you're afraid to start integrating it into the day-to-day, then give yourself a low stakes opportunity to practice it outside of work. I think a great example of this is recipes. You have a bunch of ingredients in your kitchen. You may not know what to make for dinner. Take like the recipe or the ingredients that you have, throw them into a Gen AI tool and see what it spits out in terms of sample recipes you could use. It's something that doesn't necessarily affect you at work. It's an easy way to kind of get familiar with a tool you may not necessarily feel like you can get familiar with yet. And then last but not least, for those of you who work in business and you are comfortable with AI, but you're trying to provide more opportunities for your staff to test it, I think there's some really great ways to encourage employee utilization without making them feel super overwhelmed. We love doing AI happy hours at Google, where on a Thursday at the end of the day, we gather for 15 minutes and somebody picks one AI tool and talks about it. And then we all play around with it for 10 minutes, like something super low stakes. Or providing unified times and days for exploration, specifically with a goal in mind. Okay, today we are going to all take a look at, one of these tools that we all want to use and we've decided that we're all going to figure out a way to create writing a recommendation for somebody who we would like to get into the company. Okay, everybody open up Google Docs. Okay, now we're going to use Gemini to help us produce the base draft, things like that. So the moral of the story is we're all on this journey together. It's important to give yourself grace, but taking it little by little is going to give you a lot more practice if you start now and do it every so often, as opposed to either trying to dive yourself in all the way or just sort of resisting entirely. Trust me, you're already there. Now it's just a matter of picking up little bits and pieces along the way.